Well, I'm really excited because the postman today brought me a little gift from St Cuthberts Mill. So the question is, how good is St Cuthberts Mill's premium quality cotton paper? Let's have a look, shall we, and give it a try. This paper comes on a block pad. I'll just show you what I mean, look. In other words, it's glued all the way around. See that black glue all around the edge there, look? Over that, little tiny gap on the top. Ta-da! Which just means I can get my palette knife and slide it all the way underneath in order to take off a sheet of paper. Now, one of the things as well we need to think about when we're using watercolour paper is how well those washes go on the paper. So if you want to put a large wet and wet wash for a background, which I tend to do a lot, how well does that perform on this paper? Does it sink into the paper? Does it lay flat on the surface? Does it float? Now with my Patreon tutorial of a Toko toucan, which is this one here, you can see I've actually put a basic background wash on there. And it's quite pale, quite faint, but it's gone on the paper really well. It's sunk into the paper just about the right amount because I really wanted a faded background on this Toko toucan. So how does it withstand the hairdryer? So when you're drying your painting, from a distance though, and you keep waving it back and forth, don't hold it in one place because you can burn the paper, don't want to do that, then does it cause that paper to warp? This is obviously one which I took off the pad, and you can see it's not that warped, is it? Sometimes when you get a warped piece of paper, it's all cockled as they say, I know it's a funny word, I realise that, you find that it goes like this, like a big wave all the way along. And you can see that one is nearly flat. And that's not bad going for a piece of paper. So yeah, I'm quite happy with that. And what do you think? It's had quite a lot of washes on there and a massive detail on the middle. So I think it's done really well, don't you? Now, one of the techniques I use quite a lot within my watercolour paintings is a lifting off technique. So how good is this paper for its lifting off abilities? Let's give it a try. Now that can depend on the pigments we use, we know that, because some pigments are more staining than others. So we have to allow for that as well, of course. If I get a dedicated lifting off brush like this one here, and a bit of kitchen roll, there you go, that'll do. What I'm going to do, I'm going to wet this brush first of all, and very lightly tap it within my kitchen roll, so there's still a small amount of water within those bristles. We'll start off with sap green, mixed with a little bit of burnt umber. Now sap green is a staining pigment, so bear that in mind. Now this is a really good lifting off brush, so because of that, it should do a reasonably good job. If you want to know what it is, have a look in the description down below, okay? And you can see I've still got green underneath that as well. And I want to see how much I can try to lift off before it starts to damage that paper surface. And that's how much I've taken off so far. So it's not bad really, considering it's a staining colour. It's still green though, and because of that, we haven't got back to the white of the paper, which is understandable with a staining pigment. You do find with some other brands of paper, is that the paper will start to lift off. It will go all bitty, so lots of tiny bits coming off the paper all the time. If you do that, it's not really what you want for the watercolour painting, unless of course you want that sort of effect. So it's always worth getting some scrap pieces of watercolour paper, the same make as the one that you're going to use for that main painting. And give that paper a thorough test before you use it, especially if you're new to that paper surface. At least then you'll have some understanding on how well it works, or should I say how well it does not work. Now if I switch to my homemade lifting off brush, a very wobbly lifting off brush as you can see, it works really well though. I want to see how much I can try to lift off before that paper starts to lift. Now this is also another staining colour, so worth noting. And so far, I have to admit, it's doing a really good job of it. Because it's not lifting the paper at the moment. I'm really giving quite a lot of abuse there. There we go. Now it's starting to lift the paper. That's taken a lot of abuse to get to that stage though. See all these little bits coming up there, look? That's the paper starting to lift. I've gone that little bit too far with it. But understanding how far you can go with your particular brand of paper is very important. So always have some offcuts, some little spare pieces here and there knocking about, especially from failed paintings, and make use of them. Now how will this paper stand up to using masking fluid? Let's have a look. I will start right at the very top and then work my way down the paper as I go. I tend to think about where I'm going to be placing my hand as well. I don't want to be putting my hand over the top of the masking fluid I just applied. Now masking fluid does dry fairly quickly, so just remember that when you're working with it. Because sometimes when you go back to an area you've just applied the masking fluid to, and it's starting to go off a little bit, starting to dry, then you may find you start to pull off that masking fluid you've already applied when you start putting more over the top, if you know what I mean. So just be careful not to do that. Also, another tip when you're working with masking fluid, don't apply it too thickly. Because I find the thicker the fluid is on the paper, especially when it's dry, the harder it is to remove. And another tip as well, don't dry it with a hairdryer. Now some people do and sometimes they get away with that. But very often when you do dry masking fluid with a hairdryer, it can harden that masking fluid within the paper. And therefore when you try to remove it later on, there's a good chance it may tear that paper as well. Clean finger kitchen roll. Clean finger. From the outside in, roll that masking fluid. Give a good roll like that, okay? And then from the other side as well. As you can see from this masking fluid, it's not torn the paper, it's not left any marks. And I found that with all the different masking fluids I've tried on this paper so far. I've left each one to dry naturally as well. I've not dried it with a hairdryer or anything like that. So I would say that's a really good result. Now when I start a painting, I like to transfer the outline of that subject onto that watercolour paper before I start. And sometimes just the main outline, sometimes the details in between. It all depends whether I'm adding a background or not. So my question is, does it take well to work in with a mechanical pencil like these? Does it leave an indentation on the paper? Yes, it depends on the pressure that you use when you're drawing out that image, and also the lead that you use within that pencil as well. But does it damage the paper? Let's find out. This is Saunders Waterford. If you're using a soft leaded pencil, this is a 2B, or not 2B, that's a question, and you're drawing an outline onto that paper, depending on the pressure you use will depend on how well it marks that paper. Do you want it to leave an indentation within that paper surface? That's the main question to ask yourself. And how dark do you want those lines to be? With 2B lead, with hardly any pressure on the paper, we'll see how that erases in a bit. I'm going to switch to a 2H lead, another one which I tend to use whilst working with my watercolour paintings. So do the same with that one. You can see it's much lighter. I'm not pressing on, just the weight of the pencil, that's all it is. I'm going to use the 2B again, but press on a little bit harder. And we'll do the same with the 2H lead. Now how easy is it to erase those lines? Let's give it a try. So the 2B, I'm going to try that one first of all. Works really well. So you can take that pencil off nice and easy, not a problem at all. And there's no indentation, I don't think, within that paper. We'll find out in a minute, because I'm going to put some paint over the top. We'll try the 2H, then we'll try the marks we made when using a heavier hand. So try that one. Draw that way, shall we? I didn't press on too hard, just gentle pressure, that's all I used. And how much of an imprint will that leave? And you can see even with this one here, the 2H lead, I'm finding that very difficult to remove. We'll try a little bit of alizarin crimson, shall we, first of all. Let's see if there's any indentations on that paper. Okay, we'll try that one. As you can see, there's no indentations on that paper. It's not left any sort of divots or any form of embossing, that's all it is. Has that left any indentations on the paper? So far, it doesn't look too bad. Allow it to soak in first though. Now let's try these two, the 2B and the 2H. And I can just about make out, yeah, I can see that on there. You can just see these lines on the 2H lead coming through, can't you? When that dries, it's going to be even more obvious. The problem is when you leave an indentation on the paper, let's get one of my embossing tools. So if I go for my small little round end there, if you leave an indentation like this on this watercolour surface, what will happen? You can leave black lines like that, look. Which is quite effective as well, but it depends if you want them or not. So you've got to really ease off when you're working with a pencil or mechanical pencil, whatever you've got, when you're starting to draw out an image of an animal. So by using a light hand, and this pencil here, which is a 2H lead, and it's a 0.5 nib, it doesn't hardly mark the paper at all. It doesn't really leave much of an indentation, if any, really. Now there's such a variety of masking tapes on the market, and these are the ones that we use around the painting. So just go around the edge, just preserve the white of the paper. Gives you a nice border when you finish the painting as well. So let's try these three different tapes. These two are just normal masking tape, whereas this one is a low tack, nearly clear tape anyway. Let's give them a try and see if they tear that paper. Now that will be interesting to find out. And you've also got washi tape as well, look at that lot. Oh, look at that, oh lovely. We'll try one of those in a minute as well. Does it pull off the paint and also the paper? So low tack first of all. I'll put that one down there and really rub it onto that paper like that. We'll try the washi tape as well. I'm going to really rub it onto that paper like that. Again, washi tape is low tack, isn't it? Then we've got decorating tape. Let's try these two different colours here. Each one is a different manufacturer. Now we know these are really sticky, don't we? So what you can do, you can get some tape, take it across your jeans or jumper, anything that's not too bitty, and do that a few times across your leg, or in this case my knee. And that just takes off a little bit of that stickiness on that masking tape. Really rub it on hard. Then we've got the blue version as well. A different manufacturer, and that's really sticky. Oh yeah, that's got a lot of stick in it. We'll try that one down there actually. Low tack tape first of all. Here we go. What will it do? As you can see, there's not even a mark and there's no colour on that tape either, look. Completely colourless. In fact, I could probably reuse that piece of tape. Let's try the washi tape. I've not taken any tack off this or anything like that. And that is lifted off really cleanly as well. And once again, there's no colour on that tape. The decorating tape, however, is going to be different, isn't it? You'd think it would be. And that one has come off okay. So far this paper's performing really well. You try this on some lesser quality papers and you'll have completely different results. This is the one that took a lot of tack off and that's come off really, really easily. But yet it still leaves enough tack onto that watercolour surface. And then we've got the really sticky stuff, another decorating tape. And that is starting to lift a little bit. I've got a little bit of colour on that tape, not much, just a hint of it. But it was well and truly stuck on there. Well and truly stuck on. And again, oh, there you go. Just took a little bit of paint off there by taking it off too quickly. But I'll give you some ideas on how well you can work with tapes on, I'm going to take it off quickly, on the paper. That's the sticky stuff. I'm a fine artist. I tend to work with a lot of detail, and I mean a lot of detail. So when you're looking at the texture of this paper, yes, it's cotton, but does it matter? You know, I tend to use non-cotton papers as well. To me, it doesn't really matter. Depends on the manufacturer, depends on the paper, and it also depends on the paper which you'll get on with the best. What suits you? What suits your style, you know? Because people would think, because I'm a fine artist, they would think that I would prefer to use a hot press paper, so a very smooth surface. I like to use a cold press paper, because I like the texture as well. But also, I need a paper that will give me the texture, but still allow me to apply the fine details on the paper. And you can see with this particular paper, the Saunders Waterford, we can do that no problem at all. So how does it work when you're working with lots of layers of detail? And I mean layer upon layer upon layer, loads of layers all stacked. Because I want to get the depth of the feathers on this particular bird. And to get the depth of the feathers, I need to apply them in numerous layers. How well does that paper stand up to lots and lots of brushwork? Now, the way I tend to paint my wildlife paintings, as you can see here, is that I do a lot of detailed brush strokes with a size 00 brush. In fact, a lot of the work I do is using this size 00 brush. I want to see how well this paper works by working with repeated brush strokes. In other words, if I load that brush up like that, then start to apply numerous lines. Imagine I'm doing a red fir. Red fir? What am I like? Or red grass blades. Anything like that will do. Just painting on it in one go is fine. Even using a dry brush like that, look. And that picks up the texture of that paper as well, as you can see. That unique texture, all created using those woolen felts. So if I go over the top of that, let's go for some black. That's really creamy looking black, that, isn't it? We'll add that one over the top. And see how well, a bit more, Paul. Be generous, don't be so stingy with your paint. What do you like? My middle name is Scrooge, don't you know that? I know, Paul Scrooge Hopkinson. There you go. And you can use that one over the top of the same areas. And every layer you add, the paint will get thicker and thicker and thicker. The same applies to the dry brush technique as well. I don't want to pull that red paint off, and it's not pulling off, as you can see. It's staying put. So I'd say that this paper works really well with repetitive brush strokes. Well, I do that all the time, numerous layers with the wildlife paintings. After all, we want that fur or the feathers to look quite deep, don't we? Which is why I tend to work with quite a lot of layers. Now, some people use the scratching technique on watercolour paper, and that creates sort of highlights here and there, especially if you're working on, say, a landscape or seascape. You know, it's really useful for water reflections. You're going to scratch the paper surface. I want to see how easy it is to scratch this surface. And so far, you know, if you're working on, say, a stream or a lake or something like that, you can create all these little highlights on that water. It's still a little bit damp around there, though. And this will vary depending again on the paper and how well you can scratch it. This is not a technique I use on a regular basis, on a rare occasion. But I have to say, again, that was working really, really well. I don't know about you, but I certainly don't like doing that. Not really, no. We can use it for pulling out grass blades as well, just by scratching into that paper. But you have to remember that once you've done this, there's no going back. Go now. If you fancy having a go at painting wildlife in watercolour, take a look at the video to the top right hand corner of the screen. I'll see you there.